The man went down in the middle of my showroom floor at 2:47 in the afternoon, and even before his shoulder touched the polished concrete, I knew, somewhere cold and certain in my gut, that he had chosen exactly where to land. He fell the way an actor falls. One hand flung out, the other clutching his lower back, a groan pitched loud enough to carry to the register, but not so loud it sounded rehearsed. He landed near the display of imported floor tile, on the 1 square meter of my store where I had not yet installed the anti-slip mat because the shipment was late. He knew that. I would learn later exactly how he knew that, but in the moment, all I saw was a heavy-set stranger in a gray windbreaker writhing on my floor, and a phone already out in the hand of the woman who had walked in beside him, filming. My name is Renata Vale. I was 41 years old the day Dominic Karsh pretended to shatter his spine in my Thailand flooring showroom, and by the time I was finished with him, 3 separate people had gone to prison, and a man who had spent 9 years perfecting a lie sat in a courtroom and watched a judge dismiss his case with prejudice while I sat 6 feet away and did not smile, because I had promised myself I would not give him even that. This is the story of how a con artist walked into my life to take everything I had built, and how I let him believe he was winning right up until the second the floor fell out from under him instead. Stay with me. The best part is the part where he never saw it coming. I want you to understand what he tried to take, because otherwise the ending won't cost him enough in your mind. I opened Vale Surfaces in the spring of 2014 with $41,000 of my own savings, a small business loan I had to beg 2 banks to give me, and a lease on a drafty 1,100 square foot unit in a strip mall off Corlin Road that smelled like the nail salon 2 doors down. My ex-husband had told me, on his way out the door in 2012, that I was not a starter, more of a helper, and I had spent a lot of nights since then proving that sentence wrong 1 invoice at a time. For the first 18 months, I did everything myself. I loaded pallets of porcelain tile that weighed more than I did. I learned to grout so I could talk honestly to contractors. I answered the phone in the voice of a receptionist named Diane, who did not exist because I thought a woman-owned company sounded small to the men who ran the construction crews I needed. By 2023, Diane had retired. I had a real staff of 9, a second location out by the interstate, and a reputation among the good contractors in the county as the supplier who did not cut corners and did not tolerate being lied to. That reputation is important. Hold on to it. We were, by the numbers, doing well. Not rich. Flooring is not a rich business. It is a slow, heavy, honest one, but well. I had just refinanced to buy the building on Corlin Road outright instead of leasing it. I had a line of credit. I had, for the first time in my adult life, something a person could reach out and take. And in this world, when you finally build a thing worth taking, the people who take things for a living can smell it. Dominic Karsh could smell it from 3 counties over. There is a detail about that building I need you to hold on to, because it becomes the whole hinge of the story. When I refinanced to buy it outright in early 2023, I put nearly everything I had into the down payment and the closing. My equity in that building, the difference between what it was worth and what I still owed, was, at the time Dominic Karsh walked through the door, right around $480,000. That was the number that represented, in the coldest financial terms, everything I had built since 2014. Every pallet I'd loaded, every night I'd answered my own phone as Diane, every contractor I'd earned the trust of, it all rolled up into that one figure. Almost nobody knew that number. It wasn't public in any obvious way. You would have had to go looking for it. Remember that. Somebody went looking. I did not know his name yet on the day he fell. I knew only that a stranger was on my floor, that a woman was filming, and that my whole life was about to change. I just had the direction of it wrong. I thought I was the one about to lose. Her name, she said, was Paulette. She crouched over the fallen man with her phone still recording, and her voice climbing toward hysteria in a way that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh my God, are you okay? Somebody call an ambulance. Did you see that? Did everybody see that? There's no mat, there's water on the floor. Oh my God, honey, don't move." There was no water on the floor. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the whole story. I had mopped that section myself at noon, and it had been dry for nearly 3 hours. But Paulette said water on the floor twice in the first 30 seconds, loudly, for the recording, and by the time my assistant manager, Theo, came running from the back, 2 customers who had been browsing near the grout display were nodding along, because that is how memory works. You tell a person, there was water, and half of them will remember the shine of it. I knelt down. The man Dominic, though I didn't have the name yet, had his eyes squeezed shut and his breathing shallow and theatrical. Up close, I noticed things that would matter later. His windbreaker was zipped to the throat on a warm September afternoon. His shoes were brand new, the soles unmarked, the kind of shoe a man buys the morning he intends to slip. And when Paulette's phone drifted for a second to film the tiled display instead of his face, his eyes opened, found the camera, and closed again. Just a flick, a man checking his mark. "Sir, don't move, help is coming," I said. "Can you tell me your name?" "Karsh," he whispered. "Dominic Karsh, my back, oh God, my back." Theo was already dialing. I looked up at Paulette and I said the thing that, in hindsight, was the first move in a game I didn't know I was playing yet. I said, very calmly, "I'm so glad you're getting all this on video. The whole store's on camera too, so between us we'll have everything we need." Something crossed her face. Just a flicker, the twin of the one I'd seen in his eyes. She stopped filming a few seconds later, and I stood there in the middle of my own showroom, heart pounding, and thought, they didn't know about the cameras. Here is the thing they didn't know, the thing that is the seed of everything that comes after, so let me plan it carefully. When I bought the building on Corlin Road in early 2023, my insurance broker, a blunt, chain-smoking woman named Jorgetta Illick, who had been doing this for 30 years, sat across my desk and told me that a retail floor open to the public was, in her words, a lawsuit waiting for a place to happen. She said slip and fall fraud was the most common claim she saw, that it had gotten worse every year, and that the single best thing I could do to protect the business I'd bled for was to put cameras on everything and never, ever turn them off. So I did. Not 4 cameras, 19. Every aisle, every entrance, the register, the loading dock, the parking lot, the section by the imported tile where the light was good and the floor was pretty and, as it turned out, where a professional would choose to fall. The system recorded in high definition to a drive in a locked closet in the back and kept 90 days of footage before it wrote over itself. Jorgetta had also made me do one more thing, a small thing, a boring thing that would end up being the knife. She made me post signs. Little discreet ones at eye level by each door. This property is under 24-hour video surveillance. Legally, she said, you have to tell people. Practically, she said, the honest ones don't care and the dishonest ones don't read. Dominic Karsh did not read the sign. I know he didn't, because I have him on camera walking straight past it, eyes forward, a man on his way to work. And that is the first gift the cameras gave me. 19 angles on a lie, recorded in high definition, time-stamped, backed up, and completely unknown to the 2 people who were, at that very moment, planning to sue me for everything I owned. I did not tell them about the 19 cameras. That was my first real decision. Standing over a man faking a spinal injury on my showroom floor, I made a choice that would take 14 months to pay off. I would let them build their entire case on the belief that no one was watching. And then, at the exact right moment, I would show them how wrong they were. I owe Jorgetta Illick everything for those cameras, and I have told her so more than once, and she waves it off every time with a cigarette and a rough laugh and says, "I told you, 30 years. But it wasn't just the cameras. It was the discipline she'd built into me without my noticing. Because Jorgetta hadn't only made me install the system, she'd made me maintain it, test it monthly, keep the drive backed up, keep the 90-day retention running, keep the surveillance signs current and posted. Most business owners put in cameras, and then over the years, let the system rot. A dead angle here, a drive that stopped recording there, a sign that fell down and never got replaced. The fraud rings count on exactly that decay. They count on the camera that was pointed at the wrong place, the footage that got overwritten, the sign nobody could prove was posted. Jorgetta's monthly nagging meant that on the day Dominic Karsh chose my floor, every single one of those failure points had been closed, months before, by a habit I'd resented at the time. He fell into the one perfectly documented store in 3 counties. He never had a chance, and he built his whole con on the assumption that he did. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I have it time-stamped, and because I would eventually watch that footage more times than I'd like to admit. They were good at their job and gentle with him, and Dominic Karsh performed for them beautifully. He could not stand. He could not feel his left foot, he said. Then a few minutes later he winced when they touched that same foot, which a real paralysis would not do, but paramedics are not detectives and they treated what he told them. They braced his neck. They put him on a board. Paulette rode with him, and on her way out she stopped by my register. And this is the part I remember most clearly. She was not crying anymore. She looked at me and at Theo and at the store slow the way you'd appraise a house you were thinking of buying. And she said, "You'll be hearing from us." Not from a lawyer, from us. She caught herself a half-second too late, and I watched her file that mistake away behind her eyes, and I filed it away behind mine. When the ambulance pulled out of my lot, Theo turned to me, pale, and said, "Renata, we don't have a mat down over there. And the shipment log, the mat was supposed to be installed Tuesday. This is going to be bad, isn't it?" "How did he know?" I said. "What?" "How did he know there was no mat in exactly that spot? It's the 1 square meter in the whole store without one. He walked in, walked past everything, and fell there. How did he know?" Theo didn't have an answer, but the question sat down inside me and refused to leave, and by closing time that night I had already decided 2 things. The first was that I was not going to panic, the way the old Renata, the helper, the woman who answered her own phone as Diane, would have panicked. The second was that I was going to find out how he knew, because a man doesn't guess the 1 weak spot in a 19-camera store. Somebody told him, and people who tell you the weak spots are people who have been inside. The letter came 9 days later, on the letterhead of Brandt and Sowell, attorneys at law, a firm I had never heard of with an address in a glass tower 2 towns over. It informed me that their client, Mr. Dominic Karsh, had suffered catastrophic and permanent injury to the lumbar spine as a result of the gross negligence of Vale Surfaces LLC in failing to maintain a safe premises. It used the phrase wet and unmarked hazard. It used the phrase life-altering. It demanded, to resolve the matter before litigation, the sum of $480,000. I read it 3 times at my kitchen table. $480,000 was, almost to the dollar, the equity I had in the Corlin Road building. It was not a random number. It was my number. Whoever had chosen it had looked at what I was worth and priced the injury to match. That, more than anything, told me this was not a man who had slipped. This was a man who had studied me. The old fear tried to rise. 48 hours of it, honestly, 2 nights of lying awake doing the math of losing everything, of my ex-husband's voice in my head saying not a starter, more of a helper. And then on the 3rd morning, something in me went quiet and hard and clear, the way it had gone the day I signed the lease in 2014. I made coffee. I sat down, and I wrote out on a legal pad the 2 facts I actually possessed. Fact 1. I had 19 cameras that had recorded the entire event, and Dominic Karsh did not know it. Fact 2, they had told me twice in their own careless words, "You'll be hearing from us." Did everybody see that? That this was a performance staged for a camera? I looked at those 2 facts for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Jorgeta Illick, my insurance broker, and I said the sentence that started everything. I said, "Jorgeta, someone tried to rob me with a lawsuit and I have it all on tape. I don't want to settle. I want to catch him." There was a long pause. Then Jorgeta laughed, a low, rough smoker's laugh, and she said, "Oh, Renata, I have been waiting 30 years for a client to say that to me. Do not call your insurance company yet. Do not call anybody. First, you and I are going to watch some footage, and then I am going to introduce you to a man named Wexler." Oral Wexler had been an insurance fraud investigator for the state before he retired and hung out a shingle doing it privately. And he looked exactly like a man who had spent his whole career watching people lie. Tired, patient, and impossible to surprise. He was in his 60s, wore reading glasses on a cord, and drank tea from a thermos he brought himself. Jorgeta had worked with him on a dozen cases over the years, and when she called him and said the words, "Staged slip and fall, full HD coverage, victim wants to prosecute, not settle," he drove 90 minutes to my store the next morning without discussing his fee. We sat in my back office, the three of us, and we watched the footage from all 19 cameras. Wexler watched it the way a doctor reads an X-ray. He didn't gasp at the fall. He rewound to before the fall. "There," he said, on camera 7, the parking lot. "Watch him get out of the car." Dominic Karsh climbed out of a silver sedan with the easy, painless motion of a healthy man. He stretched. He rolled his shoulders. He bent fully, deeply, no hesitation, to tie a shoe that did not need tying, which Wexler said was probably to give himself a reason to be looking down at the ground on his way in, scouting. Now watch his walk to the door. Wexler tapped the screen. Even gait, full weight both legs, no limp, no guarding, no hand on the back. This is a man with a perfectly healthy spine 90 seconds before it's allegedly destroyed forever. He sat back. And watch this. Watch where his eyes go the second he's inside. On camera 3, Dominic Karsh entered my store and his eyes went, instantly, without browsing, without wandering, straight to the tile display by the imported porcelain. Straight to the bare square of floor. He walked toward it like a man who already knew it was there. "He'd been in before," I said. It wasn't a question. "Or someone drew him a map," Wexler said. He looked at me over the reading glasses. "MS. Vale, in 19 years with the state, I saw maybe 400 of these. This is one of the cleanest fakes I've ever watched, which means one of two things. Either your Mr. Karsh is very, very good at this," he paused, "or he's done it a lot. And people who do it a lot leave a trail. You want to catch him. Don't just beat this case. Find the trail." That was the day the plan was born. Not to defend myself, to hunt him. Wexler gave me one rule that afternoon, and it was the hardest thing anyone asked of me in the entire 14 months. He said, "Asterisk, you have to let them win, all the way up to the end." Asterisk. "The instinct," he said, "is to send them your footage tomorrow, scare them off, make them go away." He shook his head slowly. "That is the amateur move, and it protects only you this one time. They'll drop the case, they'll apologize through a lawyer, they'll walk out your door, and 3 months later they'll do it to a florist in the next county who doesn't have 19 cameras. You don't want them to asterisk stop asterisk. You want them to asterisk commit asterisk. You want him to file suit. You want him to swear to his injuries under oath. You want his lawyer to build a whole beautiful house on a foundation of lies. And asterisk then asterisk, when the house is finished and everyone's living in it and it's too late to walk it back, then you show them the ground it's built on." "That could take a year," I said. "It could take 2. He capped his thermos. "The question you have to answer, MS, Vale, is whether you want to feel safe or whether you want to win, because they are not the same thing and you can only pick one." I thought about the woman named Diane I used to pretend to be. I thought about 11 years of loading pallets and proving a sentence wrong. I thought about the number in that letter, my number, $480,000, the exact worth of everything I'd built, priced by a stranger like a used car. "I want to win," I said. Wexler nodded as if he'd already known. "Then here's what we do. You settle nothing, but you also don't fight loud. You act scared. You let their lawyer smell an easy target, a small woman-owned business that'll fold to avoid a trial. You buy time. And while they think they're circling a wounded animal, we go find the other people this man has hurt. Because I promise you, MS, Vale, you are not the first floor he's fallen on." I turned out to be a good actress. Maybe I'd been practicing since 2014, since Diane. We hired a defense lawyer named Sanjay Borua, young, sharp, and, crucially, cheap-looking, the kind of solo practitioner a plaintiff's firm would take one look at and assume was overmatched. That was deliberate. Borua was actually very good. He just didn't dress like it, and he was in on the whole plan from the first meeting. His job for the next many months was to lose slowly and believably, to ask for extensions, to seem overwhelmed by Brandt and Sowell's paperwork, to send the occasional email that hinted, without ever saying it, that his client might be interested in exploring resolution. Brandt and Sowell ate it up. Their lead attorney was a man named Curtis Brandt, silver-haired, expensively suited, with the booming confidence of a man who had shaken down 100 small businesses and never once been made to sweat. In our first status conference, he treated Borua like a student and me like a checkbook. He said the words, "We'd hate to see a nice little business like yours dragged through a public trial," in a tone that was pure threat wrapped in courtesy. And I did the hardest acting of my life. I let my chin tremble. I looked down at my hands. I let Curtis Brandt walk out of that conference absolutely certain he had me. He was so certain that he got sloppy, which was the point. Because a lawyer who thinks the defense is going to fold doesn't prepare for a fight. He doesn't stress test his client's story. He lets Dominic Karsh's injuries get worse and worse in the filings. Because why not? No one's going to check until the lies are so specific and so extravagant that they can never, ever be reconciled with 19 cameras worth of truth. Every exaggeration Curtis Brandt added to that complaint was a nail I would later pull out and hand to the judge. There was an art to playing scared, and I got better at it than I ever expected to. The trick Borua taught me was never to overact. A guilty person protests too much. A genuinely frightened small business owner mostly just goes quiet and agreeable and hopes it will all go away. So I went quiet. In status conferences, I let Borua do the talking and I looked at the table. When Curtis Brandt's associate emailed with some new demand, I had Borua respond slowly, a day or two late, the way an overwhelmed person responds. Once, Brandt's paralegal called the store directly a small breach of etiquette, meant to rattle me, and asked pointed questions about our safety record. And I answered in a small, worried, cooperative voice and gave her nothing. And afterward I sat in my office and shook, half from nerves and half from the strange exhilaration of it, because I had just been interrogated by the enemy, and I had won the exchange by pretending to lose it. The hardest part was my own staff. I couldn't tell them the plan. The fewer people who knew, the safer it was, and I couldn't risk Marius sensing anything. So my 9 employees spent 14 months believing their boss was a woman being slowly crushed by a lawsuit she couldn't win, and some of them were frightened for their jobs. And Priya from the design desk actually came to me in tears one afternoon asking if the store was going to close. And I had to look her in the eye and let her believe it might, because the truth would have leaked and the leak would have cost me everything. I hated that. Of all the acting I did, lying to the people who depended on me was the part that sat worst. I promised myself that when it was over, I'd make it right with them. And I did. But in the moment, I just held Priya's hand and said we'd get through it somehow, and let her think I was braver than I felt, when really I was more dangerous than she could imagine. Meanwhile, in a rented office 40 minutes away that smelled of old coffee and printer toner, Oral Wexler had started to pull the thread. And the thread went a very long way. Wexler's method was patient and unglamorous. He started with the 2 names he had, Dominic Karsh and Paulette, and a single photograph pulled from my parking lot footage, and he began doing what he called the boring miracle: public records, court dockets, property filings, business registrations. He was looking for the shape of a pattern, and he found the first edge of it in 8 days. Dominic Karsh had a lawsuit history. Not 1, not 2. Wexler found across 4 different counties and 3 different court systems 6 prior premises liability claims filed by or on behalf of a Dominic Karsh or a D. Karsh or a Dominic K. Karshan over the previous 9 years, a grocery store, a hotel pool deck, a car dealership showroom, a medical office waiting room, a hardware store, a restaurant. Every single one had settled out of court. Every single one for a sum between $250,000 and $400,000. Not one had ever gone to trial. And in not one of them, as far as Wexler could tell from the public record, had anyone ever pulled the surveillance footage and looked hard at how Dominic Karsh fell. That's the genius of it, Wexler told me on the phone, and there was something almost admiring in his tired voice, the professional respect of a man for a very good criminal. He never gets greedy enough to go to trial. He picks businesses big enough to have insurance but small enough to be scared. He demands a number just under what it would cost them to fight it. And they all do the math and they all pay, because paying is cheaper than winning. He's been running the same play for 9 years, and it works asterisk because asterisk it never gets tested. He paused. You're going to test it, MS Vale. You're going to be the first. 6 victims, and that was just the falls I could see in the record. I asked Wexler the question that had been sitting in me since the day it happened. How did Karsh know about the 1 bare square of floor? I'm getting to that, Wexler said. And when you hear it, you're not going to like it, because it's someone you know. Before Wexler would tell me the name, he made me understand the machine, because he said I could not fight a thing I did not understand, and because, I think, He wanted me to grasp that I was not the victim of bad luck. I was the target of a business. He laid it out on my whiteboard one evening after close, drawing boxes and arrows like a man diagramming a company org chart, which is exactly what it was. At the top, Dominic Karsh, the faller, the talent, the face who took the physical risk and the deposition risk. Beside him, Paulette Vane, the witness, the camera, the emotional anchor who made juries cry and made claims feel human. Below them, a layer he called the scouts, people who found the marks, cased the businesses, identified the weak spots, and reported when a floor was vulnerable. And below that, the marks, us, the businesses, drawn as a row of little boxes, one of which had my name in it. Every piece has a reason, Wexler said, tapping the board. Karsh never scouts his own falls because a good defense lawyer will pull footage of the plaintiff casing the place beforehand, like yours did him, walking to the weak spot. So he uses local scouts who already have a reason to be inside. Delivery people, contractors, and employees. He let that word sit. The scout tells him where the weak spot is and when it's weak, so Karsh walks in, spends 30 seconds, and falls clean. He's in and out. He looks like a customer who had an accident, not a man who studied the building. That's why he's never been caught. The scouting, the part that would expose the whole thing, is done by someone who belongs there. I stared at the little box with my name in it. So the reason he found my one bare square of floor is that someone who belonged in your store told him it was there. Wexler capped his marker. Now, do you want the name? I said yes. And then he took it back one more time and told me suspicion wasn't proof and that he needed one more week. That week nearly killed me, but it's the week the whole case was won, so I let him have it. I did not sleep the night after Wexler said those words. Asterisk someone you know. Asterisk I lay in the dark running through my 9 employees like beads on a string, hating myself for it. Because I trusted them, I had chosen every one of them, and now a stranger had put a splinter of doubt into all of them at once. Wexler wouldn't tell me the name yet. Suspicion isn't proof, he said, and if I tell you now, you'll change how you act around them and they'll know and we lose the whole thing. Let me work. When I hand you a name, I'll hand you the proof with it. So I went back to my store and I looked at the people I loved: Theo, my assistant manager, old Marius on the loading dock, Priya at the design desk, the 2 brothers, Soren and Andre, who did installs, the rest, and I smiled at every one of them and felt like a traitor. Wexler's logic, when he finally laid it out, was simple and awful. Karsh went straight to the one unmatted square of floor. That information was current. The mat had only been missing since that Tuesday, a delayed shipment. Almost nobody outside the store knew the mat wasn't down, which meant Karsh's information came from inside, and it came recently, within a window of about 4 days. Someone had told a professional slip-hand fall con artist exactly where and when to fall in my store. And that someone was getting a cut. Find the money, Wexler said. Somebody on the inside is going to get paid when Karsh gets paid. That's the deal these rings run. A scout, an inside man, gets 10-15% for setting up the mark. If we can catch the payment, we don't just have Karsh, we have the whole thing. He looked at me. But it means you're going to have to keep smiling at them, MS. Veil for months, knowing one of them sold you. Can you do that? I thought about it honestly, and I said yes, because by then I wanted the whole thing more than I wanted to feel good. While Wexler hunted the inside man, Curtis Brandt handed me a gift, and he handed it to me because he was so sure he'd already won that he stopped being careful. He wanted my deposition. He wanted to put me under oath and grind me down, get me to admit the floor was wet, admit the mat was missing through negligence, admit fault so the settlement would be a formality. Borua, playing his role, reluctantly agreed and failed to fight for the protections a sharper lawyer would have demanded. Brandt thought he was walking me into a trap. He was. It just wasn't mine that was closing. Because before my deposition, Brandt had to give us his clients, and a deposition is sworn testimony. Everything Dominic Karsh said in that room, under oath, on the record, became a fixed thing, a claim he could never later revise without committing perjury. Borua's job in that deposition was not to expose Karsh, just the opposite. His job was to gently, encouragingly let Karsh lie as much as possible, to ask open questions and nod along, and let a con man with an audience do what con men do, overreach. And Karsh overreached beautifully. Under oath, He testified that since the fall he could not stand for more than 10 minutes without excruciating pain, that he could no longer lift anything heavier than a gallon of milk, that he had not driven a car in 4 months because he couldn't turn to check his mirrors, that he required a cane for any distance over a few steps, that his active, athletic lifestyle, he actually said that, was over forever. Borrower wrote it all down and thanked him warmly and did not challenge a single word. I sat in the corner of that conference room in my role as the frightened little business owner, and I watched Dominic Karsh build his own gallows one sworn sentence at a time. Because I already knew what Wexler had. I knew about the fishing trip. I'm getting to the fishing trip. It's my favorite part. There was one moment in that deposition I have never forgotten. Near the end, when Karsh was tired and comfortable and had been talking for 2 hours about how ruined his body was, Curtis Brandt leaned over and asked him, almost casually, whether he'd been able to return to any of your former hobbies, any at all. And Karsh, sensing an opening to gild the lily, to make the loss sound more tragic, sighed and said, "No, sir, that's the hardest part. I was an outdoors person. Fishing mostly, some pickup ball with the guys. I built things with my hands, worked around the house. All of that's gone now. I sit in a chair and I watch the world through a window." He actually looked at me when he said it, a flicker of a look, the con man checking whether the mark was suitably moved. I was moved, just not the way he thought, because Oral Wexler, at that exact moment, had already been surveilling Dominic Karsh for weeks, and I knew, sitting right there, that there existed, on a drive in a locked drawer, high-definition footage of this man fishing, playing pickup ball, and building things with his hands, time-stamped weeks after he swore under oath that all of it was gone. He had just voluntarily, unprompted, for sympathy, narrated the exact list of activities that would destroy him. I looked down at my hands so no one would see my face, and I thought about how the best liars always talk too much, because lying is a performance, and performers cannot resist an encore. 6 weeks after the deposition, where Dominic Karsh swore under oath that he could not stand for 10 minutes, could not lift more than a gallon of milk, and had not driven a car in 4 months, Oral Wexler sat in his own car in the gravel lot of a bait shop on Lake Corriveau at 5:40 in the morning, drinking tea from his thermos, and filmed Dominic Karsh loading a cooler, a tackle box, 2 rods, and a 40-horsepower outboard fuel tank into a boat, then driving the trailer down the ramp, then standing in that boat casting a line for 6.5 hours. Wexler was a professional, so he didn't just film the good stuff. He filmed the establishing shots, the license plate on Karsh's truck, the date's newspaper on the dashboard, the marina's own timestamp sign, so no one could ever claim the footage was old or faked or someone else. He filmed Karsh lift the cooler with both arms. He filmed him bend at the waist to gaff a fish. He filmed him laugh and stretch and stand for hours on a rocking boat with the effortless balance of a healthy man. And then, because Wexler was thorough to the point of cruelty, he came back and did it 3 more times over the following month. A pickup basketball game at a public court, carrying a window air conditioning unit up a flight of exterior stairs, 2,200 pounds of firewood, split and stacked, filmed across an afternoon. 4 separate days, 4 HD videos, each one a direct, specific, time-stamped contradiction of something Dominic Karsh had sworn to under oath. The cane he required never appeared once. The car he hadn't driven in 4 months. He drove it to the lake, to the court, to the firewood, on camera, checking his mirrors like a man with a perfectly functional spine. Wexler brought me the footage on a drive labeled only with a case number, and we watched it in my back office. And when it was over, I put my hand over my mouth, not because I was surprised, but because for the first time in months I let myself feel the thing I'd been holding down. Not fear. The other thing. The clean, cold certainty that I was going to win, and that he had no idea. "Don't celebrate," Wexler said, capping his thermos. "We're not close to done. This beats *him*, but I promised you the whole ring, and I found the inside man." He looked at me, and his tired eyes were not tired at all. Vale, I know how he knew about the mat. He set a single sheet of paper on my desk. It was a bank record, not mine, obtained the legal way, through the subpoena power that would come later, though at this stage it was Wexler's careful reconstruction from other trails, the kind of thing he'd verify airtight before it ever saw a courtroom. and it showed a pattern of small, regular cash deposits into an account belonging to someone whose name, when I read it, made the floor tilt under me. Marius. Old Marius, on the loading dock, who had been with me since 2016, who called me boss with a gruffness I'd always read as affection, who I had loaned $2,000 in 2019 when his wife was sick and never asked to be repaid. I didn't want to believe it. Wexler let me not believe it for exactly as long as it took him to lay out the rest. Marius had a nephew. The nephew had done time for insurance fraud in another state. The nephew knew Paulette. And in the 4-day window when the anti-slip mat was missing from that one square of floor, Marius, who logged every shipment, who knew to the hour when that mat was delayed, and where the gap was, had made 3 phone calls to a number that traced, through 2 hops, to Dominic Karsh. He didn't set out to destroy you, Wexler said, not gently, just accurately. These inside men rarely do. He needed money, the nephew offered him a cut for a piece of information that felt harmless. Where's the weak spot? When's it weak? And he told himself it was the insurance company that would pay, not you. That's how they all justify it. But the number he gave up was asterisk your asterisk number, MS. Vale. He priced your life's work at $480,000 and took his 15%. I sat there for a long time. Then I asked the only question that mattered. What do we do with him? Wexler almost smiled. That, he said, depends on what kind of person you are, because Marius is the loose thread, and if you pull him too soon, the whole thing unravels the wrong way. But if you pull him at exactly the right moment, he spread his hands, he stops being your betrayer and starts being your witness, against all of them, in open court. That's the whole game now, MS Vale, turning the inside man, and you're going to have to do part of it yourself. That was in November. The trial was set for the following June, which meant I had to spend a winter and a spring smiling at Marius across my own loading dock, saying good morning, asking after his wife, signing off on his shipment logs, knowing every day that he had sold me for 15%, and knowing that I could not, under any circumstances, let him see that I knew. I will not pretend it was easy. Some mornings the hatred rose in me so hard I had to go stand in the walk-in stockroom and breathe. Once, in February, Marius brought me a coffee from the good place down the road, unprompted, because you look tired, boss, and I had to take it and thank him and drink it, and it tasted like ash, and I went home that night and cried in a way I hadn't cried since the divorce. Not from sadness, from the strain of holding 2 faces on at once for months. But Wexler's plan required it, and Wexler's plan was working. Here is what he had me do carefully over those months. Nothing that would spook Marius, and one thing that would trap him. The one thing was small. On the shipment logs, the ones Marius filled out, I quietly began having Theo cross-reference every entry against the actual delivery records from our suppliers. Not to catch Marius. To build, week by week, a boring, unimpeachable paper record proving that Marius, and only Marius, had known about the missing mat in that 4-day window. Documentation, Wexler kept saying. Juries don't believe stories, MS Vale. They believe documents that make the story impossible to deny. Meanwhile, Curtis Brandt, on the other side, grew fat and lazy on his own confidence. He deposed me in December. I played my role nervous, apologetic, a small woman in over her head, so convincingly that his associate actually smirked. He came away certain, and he made his certainty concrete in the worst possible way for him. In January, he sent Borua a settlement demand that had increased to $520,000, with a cover letter warning that if we forced them to trial, they would seek the full measure of Mr. Karsh's catastrophic and permanent disability before a jury. Permanent disability. In writing. Signed. 4 months after Wexler filmed the man stacking a cord of firewood. I read that letter and I understood, finally, all the way down, why Wexler had made me wait. Every month I let them believe they'd won. They raised the stakes on themselves. They weren't just walking into a trap. They were building it higher, brick by brick, and paying for the bricks. There was one more piece of discipline the plan required, and it was Borua's, and it was the cleverest thing of all. Under the rules, both sides in a lawsuit have to exchange the evidence they intend to use before trial. It's called discovery. You can't ambush the other side in the courtroom with a surprise video. That only happens in movies. If we intended to use the 19 cameras, or Wexler's fishing footage, or the shipment logs, we would have to disclose them to Brandt and Sowell in advance, and the whole beautiful trap would spring early in a lawyer's office quietly, with no jury and no reckoning. Karsh would drop the case. Brant would settle for $1 and walk away, and a florist in the next county would fall next. So Borua did something that made me deeply nervous when he explained it, and that I came to understand was a small work of genius. He disclosed everything he was required to disclose, and not one atom more. The surveillance existence he acknowledged. He had to. The signs were on the doors. But Brant, arrogant, never actually demanded the full 90 days of footage, never pushed for it, because he assumed a scared little business had nothing on tape but its own negligence. He literally could not imagine that the footage helped us. So he didn't ask hard. And Borua, having offered the general and not been pressed for the specific, was under no obligation to volunteer that we had 19 angles of his client scouting the floor like a burglar. The fishing footage and the rest of Wexler's surveillance was different, that we would disclose, but as late as the rules allowed, in the final pretrial exchange, buried in a document production so large and so boring that Brant's overworked associate would skim it. Wexler had seen it 100 times, the winning evidence, hiding in plain sight in a banker's box, because the other side was too sure of itself to read page 400. It's not a trick, Borua told me when he saw my face. Everything we'll use we disclose exactly as the rules require. We're not hiding evidence. We're declining to educate a man who refuses to be curious. There's a difference, and every judge knows it. He smiled, the first time I'd seen him smile without the overwhelmed solo lawyer mask. They think the trial is where they finish us. We're going to let them think that right up until the trial is where we finish them. In April, 2 months before trial, Wexler did the thing that turned the whole case from a defense into a reckoning. He went and found the other people Dominic Karsh had fallen on, and he asked them a question no one had ever asked them. Asterisk, did you ever wonder if it was fake? Asterisk. The grocery store had been a corporate chain. They'd settled through insurance and forgotten it. The hotel didn't want to talk. But the car dealership, a family Ford lot 2 counties east, run by a man named Osgood Freen wanted very much to talk. Because Osgood Freen had never believed it for 1 second, and he'd been carrying the certainty of it alone for 6 years. Wexler brought Freen to meet me on a rainy Tuesday, and the man sat in my office, 60-ish, big hands, and told me a story that was my own story with the serial numbers filed off. Karsh had come into his showroom in 2017, walked straight to a spot by the service desk where a floor drain made the tiles slightly uneven. Fell. A woman with him filmed it, claimed catastrophic spinal injury, demanded $340,000, which happened to be, almost exactly, the equity Freen had in his lot. I knew, Freen said, his big hands flat on my desk. I knew the way you know, but my insurance company did the math and told me fighting it would cost more than paying it, and they paid it, and it wasn't my money so I didn't get a vote, and that man walked out of my life $340,000 richer for lying on my floor. He looked at me. I've thought about him every week for 6 years, MS, Vale. When your investigator called, I thought I was finally going crazy. Then he showed me the video of your one, walking to the exact weak spot the exact same way, and his voice broke, and this big man wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I wasn't crazy. I was right. For 6 years I was right and nobody would let me prove it. I reached across the desk and I put my hand on his, and I said the thing I'd been building toward for 6 months. Mr. Freen, would you be willing to say all of that to a jury? He didn't even pause. I would drive through a wall to say that to a jury. Before he left that day, Osgood Freen told me one more thing, and it changed how I thought about the whole endeavor. He said that after Karsh's fall in his showroom, his insurance premiums had gone up so much that he'd had to let go a mechanic he'd employed for 11 years, a man with 3 kids. So it's not $340,000, Freen said. That's just the number on the check. The real cost was Dell losing his job, and Dell's kids, and me lying awake for 6 years knowing it was all built on a lie I couldn't prove. That's what these people never put in the demand letter. The number they take is never the whole thing they take. He put on his coat. At the door, he turned back and said, "You know what the worst part was? For 6 years, I thought I was the only one dumb enough to get taken. Finding out there were others, that should feel worse. But it felt like being let out of a room. I didn't know I'd been locked in." I have thought about that sentence 100 times since. Asterisk, the number they take is never the whole thing they take. Asterisk, it's true of Karsh. It's true of every con artist who ever priced a person's life like a used car. And it's the reason I stopped, somewhere in that spring, thinking of what I was doing as revenge for myself alone, and started thinking of it as something closer to a debt I owed to a room full of people I'd never met, who had all been locked in the same dark, each of them believing they were the only one. Osgood Freen was the first. Wexler found 3 more. There was Bettina Ossel, who had run a small physical therapy clinic. The irony was not lost on any of us, where Karsh had fallen in a waiting room in 2019 and collected $280,000. There was the manager of a restaurant, a nervous young man named Pell, who at first wanted nothing to do with any of it, and then, after he learned there were others, called Wexler back at 11 at night and said quietly, "He ruined my mother's business. She never recovered. What do you need from me?" And there was, most importantly, a former associate at the very law firm, not Brandt and Sowell, but the firm Karsh had used 2 counties over on an earlier fall, a young attorney named Dara Whitcomb who had left the practice in disgust, and had in her files the intake notes from a Karsh claim. Notes that referred, in writing, to Karsh as a repeat plaintiff, and to a referral network of scouts. Notes that used the word asterisk scheme, asterisk. Wexler assembled them the way you'd assemble a legal case, because that is exactly what he was doing. Each victim alone was a story that could be dismissed as a coincidence or a grudge. But 4 of them, plus Dara Whitcomb's documents, plus 6 court filings across 9 years, plus my 19 cameras, plus the fishing and the firewood and the basketball, plus the shipment logs, plus, when the time came, the inside man himself. That was not a story anymore. That was a pattern. And in a fraud case, a pattern is the whole ball game. A single fall is an accident. 7 identical falls, each aimed at a business's exact net worth, each collected without ever risking a trial, is a criminal enterprise. Here's what you have to understand about the law, Wexler told me, the week before trial, as we sat surrounded by bankers' boxes in Borua's office. You're not really trying to win a lawsuit anymore, MS. Vale. Winning the lawsuit is easy. The phishing video alone wins the lawsuit. What you're building now is bigger. You're building the thing that puts him in prison, and the nephew, and Paulette, and gets Marius to choose which side of the table he wants to sit on. You spent 9 years being one of Dominic Karsh's marks. In about a week, you're going to become the reason he never has another one. I remember the night we finally laid all of it out on Borua's long conference table, the whole architecture of it, and it took my breath away to see it assembled. There were the 19 camera angles, cataloged and time-stamped. There were Wexler's 4 surveillance videos, fishing, basketball, air conditioner, firewood, each cross-indexed to the exact line of Karsh's sworn deposition it destroyed. There were the 6 prior lawsuits across 4 counties, printed and tabbed. There were the 4 pattern witnesses, their statements signed. There was Dara Whitcomb's file with the word asterisk scheme asterisk in it. There were Marius's phone records and bank deposits, and the transcript of the recorded call with the nephew, 11 minutes of a man hanging his whole crew. And there were the shipment logs, the boring documents, proving that only one person on Earth had known about the missing mat in that 4-day window. I stood over that table and I understood for the first time all the way down what 14 months of patience had bought me. Any one of those things alone Curtis Brandt could have explained away. A single video is a bad day. A single prior lawsuit is a coincidence. A single disgruntled employee is a grudge. But all of it together, layered, corroborating, each piece propping up the next, that was not a defense. That was an avalanche, and I had spent more than a year hauling every stone of it up the mountain by hand, and all that was left to do was choose the moment to let it go. Most people, Wexler said quietly, looking at the table with me, when someone tries to rob them, they just want to get away safe. You didn't want to get away, MS. Vale, you wanted to end him. In 30 years, I've met maybe 3 clients like you. He didn't say it like a compliment exactly, but he didn't say it like a warning either. He said it like a fact, and I took it as one, and I did not feel ashamed of it. I still don't. 10 days before trial, I did the hardest thing I did in the whole 14 months. I closed the store early on a Thursday, sent everyone home, and asked Marius to stay behind to help me go over the shipment logs. And when it was just the 2 of us in my back office, I set Wexler's file on the desk between us, and I told him I knew. I had rehearsed 100 cold, cutting things to say. I said none of them. Because when Marius understood what was on that desk, this gruff man who had carried pallets for me for 8 years, put his face in his big scarred hands and made a sound I had never heard a grown man make, and the anger I'd been nursing for 6 months went out of me like air from a cut tire. What was left underneath it surprised me. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't cruelty either. The nephew said it was the insurance company that pays, Marius said into his hands. He said nobody gets hurt. He said you'd never even know. Alina's medicine, boss. You remember. You loaned me the money in 19. You never even asked for it back, and He couldn't finish. I took his money and I told myself a story so I could sleep. And every day since I have watched you not know, and it has been eating me from the inside. And part of me hoped you'd find out just so it would stop. I let him sit in it. Then I told him the truth, which was also Wexler's plan, because by then the truth and the plan had become the same thing. Marius, there's a man named Curtis Brandt who's going to put Dominic Karsh in front of a jury in 10 days and swear he's a cripple. And I have 19 cameras and a video of him stacking firewood and 4 other people he did this to. He's going to lose badly, no matter what you do. The only question left is where you're standing when he goes down. I leaned forward. You can stand next to him as part of the scheme and go down too, because I have your phone records and your bank deposits and I will use them. Or you can stand next to me and tell the truth about the nephew and Paulette and all of it on the record and be the man who helped stop it. I can't make the fraud charge against you disappear. That's not mine to give. But cooperation counts, and I've spoken to people who will be listening. That's the whole choice, Marius. Which side of the table? He lifted his face out of his hands, and he said, "Give me the paper. I'll sign whatever tells the truth." Marius did more than sign. Marius, it turned out, wanted so badly to be clean again that he offered the one thing Wexler had not dared to ask for. There was a fraud investigator with the county, a real one, a public official, because by now Wexler had taken everything he'd built to the district attorney's economic crimes unit, and they were very, very interested. And that investigator, working with Marius's full and documented consent, arranged for one last phone call. Marius called the nephew. He told him he was nervous about the trial, that the flooring lady seemed calmer than she should be, that he wanted his cut confirmed and his role kept quiet. And the nephew, sloppy, greedy, certain, said everything. Named Karsh, named Paulette, confirmed the 15%, talked about the next one, a bakery already scouted, complained that Karsh always lowballed the scouts, laid the entire enterprise out in 11 recorded minutes because he had no more idea he was being recorded than Karsh had known about my 19 cameras. The symmetry of it still moves me. Every one of these people built their whole livelihood on the belief that no one was watching, that the mark was too scared or too dumb or too small to look. And every one of them, in the end, was undone by a camera or a microphone they didn't know was there. Dominic Karsh taught me that the world is full of hidden recordings. I just made sure the last one was mine. The DA now had a criminal case running in parallel with my civil trial, a case for organized insurance fraud that reached across 4 counties and 9 years. But here is the crucial thing, the thing Wexler had planned from the first afternoon in my back office. The criminal case was kept quiet, sealed, invisible, because if Curtis Brandt or Dominic Karsh got even a whiff of it, they'd have folded the civil suit and run, and I'd have lost my chance to look Karsh in the eye across a courtroom while he swore, one last time, to a lie he didn't know I could break. The trial started Monday. They walked in certain they were about to take everything I owned. Let me tell you about the day the floor fell out from under them. There was one more thing I did in the weeks before trial, and it is the thing I am least proud of and most proud of at the same time, and I have never fully decided which. Because of Marius's recorded phone call, we knew about the bakery. The nephew had said it plainly. There was a next one, already scouted, a small family bakery 2 towns south, and the plan was to run the same play the moment my case settled and the crew had cash to work again. A woman named Ins Barad owned it. She had never heard of Dominic Karsh. She had no idea that a man had already walked her floor, found her weak spot, and priced her livelihood down to the dollar, the way a man had once priced mine. Wexler said the safe move, the plan-protecting move, was to say nothing. If we warned her and she reacted and word got back through the network, Karsh might smell the whole thing and run before trial. Everything we'd built, the criminal case, the countersuit, the reckoning, could collapse to protect one bakery that hadn't even been hit yet. "It's a hard call," Wexler said, tired and honest. "But it's a real one. You could lose the war to save one village." I sat with that for a night, and then I did something that was not in the plan, and I did it without telling Wexler until it was done, because I did not want to be talked out of it. I drove to that bakery. I bought a loaf of bread, and I asked Barad if I could speak with her privately for 5 minutes, and I told her carefully, generally, giving her nothing that could leak, that she should, in the next few months, check that every mat in her shop was down, install cameras if she didn't have them, and never, ever settle a slip-and-fall claim without pulling the footage first. I didn't name Karsh. I didn't mention the trial. I just gave one small business owner the warning I would have killed to have gotten myself. She looked at me strangely. She probably thought I was eccentric, but she thanked me and I drove home and the plan survived. Karsh never got wind of it, and I decided that a version of revenge that leaves the next victim undefended is not a version I want. Wexler, when I finally told him, was quiet for a while. Then he said, "That was a risk you had no right to take." And then he said, "I'd have done the same thing." And he never mentioned it again. I want to be honest about the cost of the plan, because the neat version of this story, cameras, videos, gotcha, leaves out the part that nearly broke me, and if you're ever in my position, you deserve to know the truth about it. 14 months is a long time to live inside a lie you're telling on purpose. I ran a business the whole time. I made payroll for 9 people. I signed for shipments and grouted sample boards and reassured contractors, and I did all of it while carrying, every single day, the knowledge that one of the people saying good morning to me had sold me, and the knowledge that at any moment Curtis Brandt could stumble onto the truth and the whole thing could evaporate, and the low, grinding fear that maybe I was wrong, maybe Wexler was wrong, maybe the videos wouldn't be enough, and I'd lose everything for the sin of pride. I stopped sleeping properly around February. I lost weight I didn't have to lose. My sister, my real sister, Corvina, who knew a sanitized version of the story, sat me down in March and told me I looked like a woman being slowly poisoned, and she wasn't wrong. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from holding 2 faces on at once, the public face and the private plan, for month after month, and no one warns you about it because in the movies the trap springs in an afternoon. Mine took a year and a quarter, and it aged me. What kept me going was a thing Wexler said, offhand, on a bad night when I called him at 10 p.m., ready to quit, ready to just settle and make it stop. He said, "MS. Vale, the reason his con works on everyone is that it's built to make waiting feel unbearable. The scared math, the pressure, the mounting fees, it's all designed to make you break early and pay. Every day you don't break is a day you're beating him at the exact thing he's best at. You're not just enduring the wait. The wait asterisk is asterisk the fight." I wrote that down. I put it on my bathroom mirror, and I made it, one unbearable day at a time, to Monday morning in a gray suit and a courthouse. I wore gray. I remember that. A plain gray suit, nothing expensive, because even now, even walking into the courthouse on the morning I'd spent 14 months building toward, the plan required me to look like what Curtis Brandt believed I was. A small, frightened woman about to be crushed by a big, confident firm. He played his part beautifully, right to the end. In the corridor before we went in, Curtis Brandt actually approached me, silver-haired and smiling, and murmured that it wasn't too late to be reasonable, that a jury might not be kind to a business that let a man be maimed on its floor, that he'd hate to see me lose everything over pride. I let my eyes go wide. I let my hand shake around my coffee. I said in a small voice, "I just want this to be over." And it was true, every word of it, only not in the way he heard it. Dominic Karsh came in on a cane. He hadn't needed a cane at the lake, or the basketball court, or the firewood pile, or on any of the 19 cameras. But he came into that courtroom leaning on one, taking small pained shuffling steps, lowering himself into his chair with a wince and a hand on his lower back, and I watched the jury watch him, and I saw 2 of them wince in sympathy, and for one cold moment the old fear came back. Because he was asterisk good. Asterisk he'd been doing this for 9 years. He was the best liar I had ever seen, and he was performing the role of his life, and if I had not spent 14 months and every ounce of my discipline preparing for exactly this, I might have believed him myself. Paulette sat behind him in the gallery, in a soft cardigan, dabbing her eyes. The devoted partner. Somewhere in a sealed file across town, her name sat on a criminal complaint. She didn't know that yet. None of them knew any of it. They walked into that courtroom the way Karsh had walked into my store, eyes forward on their way to work, straight past the sign that said they were being watched. Judge Halloran Teague took the bench at 9:15. She was in her 60s, small, precise, with reading glasses and a way of looking at lawyers that made them choose their words. Wexler had told me she had a reputation. She did not suffer games, and she despised nothing on earth more than a person who lied to her court. I would come to understand over the next 3 days exactly how much that mattered. Curtis Brandt put on his case first, and it was, I'll admit, a good show. He opened by telling the jury about a hard-working, active, athletic man, that word again, whose life had been destroyed in a single, preventable, negligent instant on the floor of my store. He put up a photograph of the bare square of tile, blown up huge, and he called it a trap. He said the word trap 11 times over 3 days, Borua counted. He put a doctor on the stand, a paid expert, who testified in confident medical language about the objective findings of Karsh's lumbar injury, the herniated disc, the nerve impingement, the permanent limitation. He put up an MRI on a big screen and pointed at a shadow and used the words catastrophic and permanent, and I watched the jury nod. Then he put Paulette on, and Paulette wept and described the day and said under oath on the record, a fixed and unchangeable thing, that there was water all over that floor. I saw it. It was wet and there was no warning, no mat, nothing. She said Dominic could no longer garden or dance with her or carry groceries or sleep through the night. She said he used a cane everywhere, every day. He can't take a step without it. She was compelling. 2 jurors were crying with her. I made myself watch Paulette's whole performance without moving a muscle, and I'll tell you, it was a masterclass, and it frightened me a little to see how good she was. She had the small, authentic-seeming details down, the way real grief snags on tiny things. She talked about how Dominic used to make her coffee every morning and couldn't lift the pot anymore, and how she'd found him crying in the garage one night trying to open a jar. She wasn't crying for the jury the obvious way. She'd let her voice go thick and then fight it, the way people fight real tears, and dab quickly and apologize for being emotional. Every instinct in that jury box reached toward her. And I sat there knowing that the tender, broken woman describing her partner's crying in the garage was the same woman who'd stood over him on my floor saying, "Water on the floor," to a camera while looking at the lens. The same woman who'd said, "You'll be hearing from us," before there was any us to hear from. The same woman whose name was on a sealed criminal complaint across town. She was not grieving. She was working. And she was so good at it that I finally understood how 6 businesses before me had paid without a fight. If I hadn't had the cameras, if I'd had only my word against hers, I would have lost. That thought kept me humble even as the trap closed. It's not that I was smarter than her victims. It's that I got lucky with an insurance broker who nagged me about cameras, and then I refused to waste the luck. And then, on the second day, Curtis Brandt put Dominic Karsh himself on the stand, and Dominic Karsh, under oath, in open court, in front of a jury and a judge who despised liars, told every single lie he had told in his deposition. And then, because Brandt asked him to, and because he was greedy and certain and had never once been made to sweat, he told several more. He said he had not driven a car since the accident. He said he could not stand for more than a few minutes. He said the cane was a permanent part of his life now. He said he had not been able to do any of the physical activities he loved, fishing, basketball, working with my hands, since the day he fell on my floor. He named them: fishing, basketball, working with his hands. He looked at the jury with wet, sincere eyes, and he named one by one the exact 4 activities Oral Wexler had filmed him doing in high definition. I kept my face perfectly still. But inside, I thought, asterisk, there it is. He just handed me the last brick. Asterisk, and Borua beside me very slightly tapped his pen twice on the table. That was our signal. It meant, asterisk, he's all the way. Now we spring it, asterisk. Sanjay Borua stood up to cross-examine Dominic Karsh at 2:10 on the second afternoon, and he did not look overwhelmed anymore. I had watched him play the flustered solo practitioner for 14 months, and I had almost forgotten what he actually was. And I think Curtis Brandt had entirely forgotten, because when Borua buttoned his jacket, and walked to the podium with a single thin folder and a calm I'd never seen on him in public. Brant was still leaning back in his chair, with the loose confidence of a man watching a formality. He stopped leaning back about 90 seconds later. Borua started gently, almost kindly. He walked Karsh back through his testimony, getting him to say it all again, nailing every board down tight. "So I have this right, Mr. Karsh, since the day of the fall you have not driven a car. Asterisk, that's correct. Asterisk, not once. Asterisk, no, sir, I can't turn to check my mirrors. Asterisk, and you require a cane to walk any real distance. Asterisk, every day. I hate it, but yes. Asterisk, you can't stand for more than a few minutes. Asterisk, no. Asterisk, you certainly couldn't, say, stand in a boat for hours or play basketball or split and stack firewood." And here Karsh, greedy, certain, wanting the jury's sympathy, made it worse than it had to be. He gave a sad little laugh and said, "Sir, I'll never do any of those things again in my life." Borua nodded slowly, as if absorbing something tragic. He let the silence sit. Then he said quietly, "Your Honor, defense would like to publish Exhibit 41. Brant was on his feet. "Objection, we've not been shown." But he had been shown. It was in the pretrial production, page 400 and something, in the banker's box his associate had skimmed. Judge Teague looked over her glasses, established on the record that the exhibit had been properly disclosed in discovery. Borua had the transmittal receipt ready, dated, signed, and overruled him. Brant sat down slowly. I don't think he understood yet, but some animal part of him had started to. The screen came on. And there was Dominic Karsh, in high definition, on the deck of a bait shop at Lake Corriveau, lifting a cooler with both arms, bending at the waist, standing tall in a rocking boat, casting a line, laughing in the morning sun, with the date on a newspaper on his dashboard. 6 weeks after he swore under oath he could no longer do any of it. The courtroom made a sound, not a gasp exactly. A kind of collective intake, the sound a room makes when everyone in it revises reality at the same instant. I have replayed the next 20 minutes in my memory more times than I can count, and it never stops being the most satisfying 20 minutes of my life. Not because it was loud, because it was quiet and inevitable, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Borua did not gloat. That was the plan, too. He simply played the videos one after another, and after each one he asked Karsh a single soft question. After the fishing video, "Mr. Karsh, is that you?" A long silence. "That appears to be me." After the basketball video, Karsh sprinting, jumping, laughing. "And that?" A longer silence. "I'd have to, I don't recall that day." After the firewood, 2,200 pounds split and stacked across an afternoon. "You testified 2 minutes ago that you would never do any of these things again in your life. Do you remember saying that?" And Dominic Karsh, the best liar I have ever seen, opened his mouth, and for the first time in 9 years, nothing came out. Judge Teague was watching him now with an expression I will never forget. It was not anger. It was a cold, focused attention, the look of a person who has just been shown, in her own courtroom, that someone spent 3 days lying directly to her face, and to a jury she was responsible for. She had a reputation for despising liars. Dominic Karsh had just given her the purest specimen of the species she had ever seen. Borua published the 19 camera footage next. Karsh climbing painlessly out of his car in my lot. Karsh stretching, bending to tie an untied shoe. Karsh walking with a perfect, even gait straight to the one bare square of floor, like a man reading a map only he could see. Karsh's eyes finding Paulette's camera on the way down. And then the coupe, synchronized side by side on a split screen. Paulette on the stand swearing. There was water all over that floor, next to the time-stamped footage of that same dry floor 3 hours after I had mopped it. And of Paulette herself saying, "water on the floor," to a camera, while looking not at the floor, but at the lens. Curtis Brant asked for a recess. Judge Teague did not grant it. She said in a voice like a closing door, "Counsel, we will proceed." She wanted to see the rest. I think by then she wanted it more than I did. I watched the jury during the split screen. That was the moment their faces changed for good. The two who had cried with Paulette the day before, a retired schoolteacher in the front row and a young man in a work shirt near the end, I watched them go from sympathy to confusion to a slow, hardening anger, the specific anger of a person who realizes they were nearly made a fool of. Nobody likes being lied to. But a juror, person pulled out of their ordinary life, and made to sit in judgment and asterisk swore an oath to be fair asterisk. A juror who realizes the plaintiff has been treating their sympathy as a resource to be mined. That juror becomes the most dangerous person in the room. I saw it happen to all 7 of them, and the 2 alternates over the span of about 10 minutes, and I understood that Dominic Karsh had lost not just the case, but every heart in that jury box, and that no closing argument in the world was going to win them back. Borua, for his part, never raised his voice once. This was the thing Wexler had drilled into both of us. Let the evidence be loud so you can be quiet. A lawyer who shouts is a lawyer who's afraid the facts aren't enough. Borua stood at that podium with his single thin folder and asked his soft questions and let 19 cameras and 4 videos and a split screen do all the shouting for him. And the contrast, the calm defense lawyer, the collapsing con man, the frantic plaintiff's attorney objecting to the floor for existing, told the jury everything about which side had the truth. Wexler had told me once that in a courtroom, calm is the sound of a person who already knows how it ends. I finally understood what he meant. The lawsuit was already over. Everyone in that room knew it. But I had not spent 14 months to merely win a lawsuit. I had spent 14 months to end a career, and so the case did not stop with the videos. Borua moved, and Judge Teague permitted, given the fraud now nakedly before the court, to call rebuttal witnesses to the pattern. And one by one, they came. Osgood Freen took the stand, big hands flat, and told the jury about 2017, about the spot by the service desk, about the woman filming, about the $340,000 that was almost exactly his equity, about 6 years of knowing and never being allowed to prove it. Bettina Ossel told them about her physical therapy clinic in 2019. Young Pell told them, voice shaking, about his mother's restaurant that never recovered. And Dara Whitcomb, the attorney who'd quit in disgust, produced her intake notes, the ones that called Karsh a repeat plaintiff, that referenced a referral network of scouts that used the word asterisk scheme asterisk in black and white years before he ever set foot in my store. Curtis Brandt objected to all of it and was overruled on all of it, because a plaintiff who has manifestly perpetrated a fraud on the court opens the door to exactly this, and Judge Teague swung that door wide. I watched Brandt's face travel, over the course of that afternoon, from confidence to confusion, to a gray, dawning horror as he understood 2 things at once. The first was that his client was a serial criminal. The second, which I suspect frightened him more, was the question every person in that courtroom could now see forming. Asterisk, how much did his lawyer know? Asterisk, Curtis Brandt had raised the settlement demand to $520,000 and threatened us with a catastrophic and permanent injury 4 months after that injury was disproven on video. He had not asked hard questions of his own client because the answers might have cost him a payday. And Judge Teague was looking at him, now the same cold way she'd looked at Karsh. That was when I understood that Wexler had been right about something he'd said in November, something I hadn't fully grasped at the time. Asterisk, you're not trying to win a lawsuit anymore. Asterisk, I was watching an entire machine, the con man, the scout, the partner, the willingly blind lawyer, the whole 9-year enterprise, come apart in a single afternoon in a single room, because one small frightened woman had declined to be scared and had put 19 cameras on the truth and had waited. And then, at the end of the second day, Sanjay Borua said the name that turned the civil trial into the hinge of a criminal one. Defense calls Marius Apriya. I watched Dominic Karsh's head come up. I watched Paulette go still in the gallery, because they knew that name. That name was their inside man, their scout, the source of the $480,000 number that was my number. And he was walking up the aisle to the witness stand, and he was not walking toward them. Marius was terrified. His hands shook. But he had made his choice in my back office 10 days earlier, and he did not unmake it. Under Borua's careful questioning, he told the whole thing. The nephew, the cash, the 15%, the 3 phone calls in the 4-day window when the mat was missing, the window only he had known about because he logged the shipments. He told them how the nephew had said nobody gets hurt, the insurance company pays. He told them, his voice cracking, about his wife's medicine and the $2,000 I'd loaned him in 2019 and never asked back, and how he'd betrayed the one person who'd been decent to him, and how it had eaten him alive for a year. Curtis Brandt did not cross-examine him, I don't think he could. I think he had finally understood that every question he asked now was a shovel, and the hole was already deep enough. When Marius stepped down, he had to pass our table. He stopped. He looked at me, really looked, the way he hadn't been able to for a year, and he didn't say anything because there was nothing to say in a courtroom. He just gave one short nod. I gave one back. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever all the way. But it was two people who had finally, both of them, stopped lying. And in that room on that day, that was worth more than I can tell you. I want to say something about Marius, because the neat revenge version of this story would make him a simple villain, and he wasn't. He was a man who got squeezed by a sick wife and a medical bill and a persuasive nephew, and who made a coward's choice, and then had to live inside it for a year while the person he'd betrayed brought him coffee's worth of ordinary kindness every day. That's not an excuse. There isn't an excuse. But when I watched him climb into that witness box, shaking and choose, with the nephew's people surely to hear about it, with his own criminal exposure hanging over him, to tell the truth anyway, I understood that the choice I'd given him in my back office had cost him something real. It's easy to be brave when you have nothing to lose. Marius told the truth with everything to lose, and I have never been able to make myself hate him the way the story says I should. The people I hated sat at the plaintiff's table, and they had never, not once in 9 years, chosen the hard, true thing over the easy, paid lie. Marius did it once when it counted. That has to be worth something. I've decided it is. On the morning of the third day, before the jury was even brought in, Curtis Brandt stood, and in a voice that had lost all its boom, moved to withdraw the complaint. Judge Halloran Teague looked at him over her reading glasses for a long moment. Then she said the thing I had waited 14 months to hear, and she said it slowly, so that it would be on the record forever. Mr. Brandt, your client will not be permitted the dignity of a quiet withdrawal. This court has sat through 2 days of testimony that it now understands to have been a deliberate and sustained fraud, perpetrated under oath, in aid of what the evidence suggests is a criminal enterprise spanning 9 years and multiple victims, several of whom sat in that chair, and were failed by a system that found it cheaper to pay liars than to catch them. She took off her glasses. The complaint of Dominic Karsh against Veil Surfaces LLC is dismissed. It is dismissed asterisk with prejudice asterisk, meaning it can never be refiled. I am referring the entirety of this record, Mr. Karsh's testimony, MS, Paulette Vane's testimony, and the conduct of plaintiff's counsel, to the district attorney and to the state bar, and I am ordering the plaintiff to pay the full defense costs of this action. She looked at Karsh, and then at Brandt, and she said, quietly, in 31 years on this bench, I have never seen anything quite like what you brought into my courtroom. I want that on the record, too. I did not smile. I had promised myself I would not, and I didn't. But I let myself breathe all the way down for what felt like the first time since the man went down on my floor at 2:47 in the afternoon 14 months before. It was over. And it had gone exactly, precisely, the way we planned, except for one part. The part where I learned that winning the lawsuit had only ever been the beginning. I looked at Dominic Karsh once, as the courtroom emptied. He was still sitting in his chair, the cane leaning useless against the table beside him, and for the first time in 3 days he had forgotten to be in pain. He was just a middle-aged man staring at nothing, watching a 9-year career and every dollar he'd stolen and the freedom he had left evaporate in front of him, and there was no performance left in his face, nothing for the jury, nothing for the camera. Because there was no jury and no camera anymore, there was just the man underneath, and the man underneath looked exactly as small as he was. He felt my eyes and looked up and met them. I didn't glare. I didn't gloat. I just held his gaze, calm and steady, for about 3 seconds, long enough for him to understand that the frightened little business owner he'd priced at $480,000 had never existed, that the woman who'd been watching him the whole time was the one sitting across the room right now, unafraid, and that she had beaten him not with luck but on purpose. Then I gathered my things and I walked out, and I let him sit there with it. That look was the only revenge I let myself take in the room. It was enough. It was more than enough. Here is the thing about being the mark of a professional con artist. The law does not just let you defend yourself. If you can prove the con, the law lets you turn the whole thing around and come after them. We had been ready for this from the start. The same afternoon Judge Teague dismissed Karsh's case, Borua filed the counterclaim we had prepared and held in reserve for exactly this moment. Vale Surfaces LLC against Dominic Karsh, Paulette Vane, and this was the part that made Curtis Brandt's face go the color of paper, the referral network, for civil fraud, abuse of process, and malicious prosecution. We sued them for the 14 months of legal fees. We sued them for the business I'd lost while I was distracted defending my life's work. We sued them for the emotional distress of a year spent smiling at a man who'd sold me. And under the state's civil fraud statute, we sued them for treble damages, 3 times the harm, which is the law's way of saying that people who run scams don't just pay back what they took. They pay a price for having tried. Karsh had no defense. He couldn't have a defense. He'd already been proven a fraud with prejudice in the same courthouse. The countersuit was, functionally, a formality with a very large number at the end of it. But it was more than money. Every dollar of the judgment against Dominic Karsh was a lien, and Wexler, patient, thorough, tea-drinking Wexler, had spent part of that long winter quietly mapping where a 9-year con artist keeps the money he steals. The lake house, the 2 rental properties held under a cousin's name. The boat, the very boat I'd watched him stand in for 6.5 hours. It was all findable because men like Karsh believe, right up until the end, that no one is looking. I was looking. I had been looking the whole time. Collecting on a judgment is its own slow, grinding art, and Wexler and Borua were as patient with it as they'd been with everything else. We domesticated the judgment in the counties where Karsh held property. We placed liens. We forced the sale of the assets that could be forced. Some of it he'd hidden well enough that untangling it took another year of quiet legal work, cousins' names peeled back one filing at a time, a shell here, a transfer there. I didn't rush it and I didn't obsess over it. By then the money was almost beside the point. What mattered was that the machinery of the law, once it finally turned its attention to Dominic Karsh, was relentless in exactly the way he had spent 9 years betting it never would be. He had built his whole life on the belief that fighting was too expensive and slow for anyone to bother. I made fighting my hobby. I had the time. I had the evidence. And I had, by then, absolutely nothing left to be afraid of. I promised you at the start that 3 people went to prison, and I keep my promises, unlike some. The criminal case the district attorney had been quietly building, the sealed one, the one Karsh never smelled, came down about 4 months after the trial. Dominic Karsh was charged with organized insurance fraud, perjury, and conspiracy across 4 counties and 9 years. Marius's cooperation, and the recorded 11-minute phone call, and the pattern witnesses, and Dara Whitcomb's documents, and my 19 cameras made it, in the words of the prosecutor who tried it, the most thoroughly documented fraud enterprise I have handled in 20 years. Karsh went to prison. So did the nephew whose sloppy recorded phone call had named everyone. So did Paulette Vane, who was not the grieving devoted partner but a full partner in the enterprise, the woman with the phone, the one who said water on the floor while looking at the lens. She took a plea, but it was a plea to a felony, and she served time. Curtis Brandt did not go to prison. The state bar could not prove he'd known, before the trial, that his client was a fraud. Willful blindness is hard to charge. But willful blindness is easy to suspend a license over, and the bar suspended his for 3 years, and the story of the flooring case followed him, and the last I heard, Curtis Brandt no longer files premises liability suits against small businesses, because no small business will ever be frightened of him again. That, in its way, satisfied me more than prison would have. The prosecutor who tried the criminal case, a sharp, unhurried woman named Adiz Akwu from the Economic Crimes Unit, told me afterward that the thing that made the case unbreakable was not any single piece of evidence, but the way the pieces authenticated each other. Fraud cases usually come down to one person's word against another's, she said. Yours came down to a camera, confirming a video, confirming a phone record, confirming a bank deposit, confirming 4 strangers who'd never met each other telling the identical story. There was nothing for the defense to pull on. Every thread they yanked was tied to 3 others. She paused and looked at me with something I chose to read as respect. I've prosecuted these rings for years. MS, Vale. Usually I'm building the case from scratch after the damage is done. This is the first time a victim handed me a finished one. You didn't just survive him. You did my job for me. Karsh's defense attorney in the criminal trial, not Brandt, who by then had troubles of his own, tried to argue that his client was a sad, disabled man being persecuted by a vindictive business owner. Adiz played the firewood video. She played it in full, all afternoon of splitting and stacking, no cuts, 2,200 pounds, and she let the jury watch the disabled man work for as long as it took for the argument to die in the room. He was convicted on every count. Marius pleaded guilty to a reduced charge, received probation and community service in light of his cooperation, and paid back every dollar of the 15%. He does not work for me anymore. Some bridges, once you see the cracks, you don't walk across again, even if you don't burn them. But when his probation ended, he sent me a letter, handwritten, and it said only, "Asterisk, you gave me the choice to tell the truth. Nobody had ever done that for me. Thank you, boss. Asterisk, I keep it in a drawer. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because it's proof that the point of all of it was never only revenge." The civil judgment against Dominic Karsh and Paulette Vane, with treble damages, came to just over $1,400,000. I want you to sit with the arithmetic of that for a moment, because it is the most satisfying math I have ever done. Dominic Karsh looked at my life's work and priced it at $480,000, my number, the exact equity in the building I'd bled to buy. He tried to take that from me with a lie. And when it was over, the law made him pay me that number asterisk 3 times over asterisk, plus fees, plus costs. And then it took his lake house and his rental properties and his boat to satisfy the judgment when he couldn't pay it in cash. The boat, especially. I made sure the boat was sold. I did not need the money from a boat. But there was a symmetry to it. The boat he stood in for 6.5 hours the day he handed me my case, that I could not resist, and I have decided, at this point in my life, that I am allowed to want a little symmetry. Some of the money I never collected. You can't squeeze what a man has already spent. But most of it I did. And here is what I did with it, because this is the part that matters to me now. I paid Wexler and Borua what they were worth, which was a great deal. I set aside a fund, a real one, with a lawyer administering it, for small businesses in the county facing exactly this kind of shakedown, so that the next Osgood Freen, the next florist, the next bakery Karsh's nephew had already scouted, would have somewhere to call before their insurance company did the cheap, cowardly math and paid a liar to go away. And I sent Osgood Freen, who had been right and alone for 6 years, a check and a note that said only, asterisk, you weren't crazy. You were first. Thank you for driving through the wall. Asterisk. People ask me, when they hear this story, whether I felt triumphant. Whether springing that trap, the videos, the courtroom, the floor falling out from under them, was the sweetest moment of my life. The honest answer is no. The videos were satisfying, yes. The judge's voice saying asterisk dismissed with prejudice asterisk was satisfying. But the sweetest moment came later, and it was much quieter, and I almost didn't notice it happening. It was a Tuesday, about 8 months after the trial, an ordinary Tuesday in the store I'd nearly lost. A young couple came in to pick out tile for their first house, nervous, holding samples up to the light, asking me the shy questions people ask. When they're spending money they don't quite have on a life they're just starting to build. And I helped them, the way I'd helped 1,000 people since 2014, and I walked them past the display by the imported porcelain, the spot, the exact square of floor, and I felt absolutely nothing. No knot in my stomach. No ghost of a man going down at 2:47. Just my floor in my store in the life I had refused to let a con artist take from me. That was when I knew it was really over. Not when the judge ruled. Not when they went to prison. When the floor became just a floor again. I think about the woman I used to be. The one who answered her own phone as a receptionist named Diane because she thought a woman-owned business sounded small. The one whose ex-husband told her she was not a starter, more of a helper. That woman would have settled. She'd have done the cheap, safe math and paid Dominic Karsh his $480,000 and spent the rest of her life feeling small. And Karsh would have moved on to the bakery and the florist and the next hardware store forever, because nobody would ever make him sweat. I made him sweat. I let him climb all the way to the top of his own ladder, and I waited, patient as Wexler with his thermos, until he'd sworn to every lie he had, and then I showed him the 19 cameras he never knew were watching. Revenge, it turns out, is not the loud part. It's not the courtroom. Revenge is the 14 quiet months of choosing to win instead of choosing to feel safe. It's the discipline of the smile you don't want to give. It's the patience to let a liar finish, building the thing that will bury him. He walked into my store believing no one was watching. He was wrong. I was watching. I had been watching the whole time. And I will never, as long as I live, regret making him find that out the hard way. If you're out there right now being told to do the cheap, cowardly math to pay the liar and feel small, I want you to remember one thing before you decide. You can feel safe or you can win. They are not the same thing. Choose the one you can live with. I chose mine. And on that ordinary Tuesday, standing on a floor that was finally just a floor, I slept that night like a person at peace.